My name is Phoebe. I'm 37 years old and I work as a forensic accountant at one of the largest independent financial investigations firms in Ontario. What that means, in plain language, is this. I find money that people think they've successfully hidden. I follow the paper trails that liars leave behind when they believe they've been clever enough to cover their tracks. I've spent 11 years learning how financial fraud actually works, not from textbooks, but from sitting across depositions and interrogation tables, watching the exact moment a person realizes their numbers don't add up anymore. 18 months after my divorce was finalized, I ran into my ex-husband at the Ontario CPA annual recognition gala at the Fairmont Royal York in downtown Toronto. I almost didn't go that night. My team had been commended for successfully tracing a $4.7 million embezzlement scheme buried inside a pharmaceutical distribution company's subsidiary accounts, and a part of me wanted to skip the whole thing, collect the certificate by courier, and spend the evening with a bowl of soup and my cat. But my managing partner had looked at me over her reading glasses and said, "Phoebe, you worked 16-hour days for 8 months on that file. You are going to that gala and you are going to stand in that room and let them applaud you." So I went. I wore a deep teal silk dress and I carried the small black evening clutch that I only bring out when I need to feel like someone formidable. I was standing near the coat check on the mezzanine level, waiting for a colleague when I heard his voice behind me. I would know that voice in a room full of 1,000 people. 8 years of marriage wires a sound into your nervous system in ways you don't fully appreciate until it's too late. "Well," my ex-husband said, "look who it is." I turned around slowly. He was standing there in a charcoal tuxedo I didn't recognize, new, expensive, the kind of jacket a man buys when he wants the world to know he's doing well. Standing beside him was my former closest friend. She was wearing a navy gown, and her left hand was resting deliberately against her stomach, showcasing both a diamond engagement ring and what was unmistakably a pregnancy bump. She looked at me with the careful, composed expression of someone who has rehearsed this moment many times. My ex-husband had left me 22 months earlier. He'd sat across from me at the kitchen table in the house we owned together in Mississauga and told me, in a voice that was somehow both rehearsed and cruel, that I had never truly been present in our marriage, that I cared more about forensic ledgers than about him, that he had been emotionally alone for years while I chased other people's financial crimes, that he deserved someone who actually wanted a life, a real life, the kind that included family and warmth and presence. 3 weeks later, I found out that deserving someone meant my closest friend from work. The woman who had sat with me in the hospital waiting room during my second unsuccessful EUI cycle, who had driven me home from the clinic and held my hand while I cried in her car in the parking lot of a Shoppers Drug Mart on a gray October afternoon. She had been with him for at least 6 months before he walked out. She and I had eaten lunch together 3 times a week during that entire period. During the divorce, his commercial real estate development company, which he'd built over the previous decade, was declared nearly insolvent on paper. His lawyer provided documentation showing the company's assets had been depleted by market downturns and poor project timelines. I walked away with the equity from our home sale, which covered the mortgage payout and left me with roughly $60,000. My lawyer had pushed harder, but the corporate documentation was airtight, and I was exhausted and heartbroken, and not yet thinking with the precision I use at work. Standing on the mezzanine of the Fairmont Royal York 18 months later, my ex-husband stepped forward and looked me up and down with the ease of someone who has already decided how this moment ends. "Big night for you," he said. That particular quality in his voice, the one I recognized from the last 2 years of our marriage, where every word carried a thin coating of mockery beneath a veneer of pleasantness. "Commendation for finding someone else's hidden money. Meanwhile, your own life is." He glanced around, as though taking inventory of my aloneness. "Still just you, still exactly the same." My former closest friend let out a small, practiced laugh. "Brendan," she said softly, as though restraining him, though her eyes said otherwise. He wasn't finished. He put his hand on her back and looked at me with an expression I can only describe as triumphant satisfaction. "I don't say this to be cruel, Phoebe. I say it because I genuinely think you need to hear it. The reason things didn't work between us wasn't just the hours or the travel. It was that you were never going to choose a life over a career. And now," he nodded toward her stomach, "we're building the family I always wanted, something you were never going to give me." I had gone through 2 years of fertility investigations and treatment during our marriage. Elevated FSH levels, 2 IUI cycles that failed, a specialist at Mount Sinai in Toronto who walked me through every possible next step with the careful tone of someone delivering difficult news. $62,000 in out-of-pocket expenses above what OHIP covered, not including medication costs. My ex-husband had attended the first consultation and then claimed work conflicts for every subsequent appointment. I had gone alone every single time. He had told me, repeatedly, that the doctors suspected the issue was most likely on my side, that his preliminary workup had come back normal. I had believed him because I had no reason not to. I stood on the mezzanine and let him finish speaking. My heart rate did not change. That is not an exaggeration, it is simply what 11 years of forensic work teaches you. When the numbers on a spreadsheet are devastating, you cannot afford to fall apart. You stay still, you read the data, and you identify what is actually in front of you. I appreciate you being so candid, I said. My voice came out flat and even the way it does in a deposition room. Give it 60 seconds. He frowned. What? 60 seconds, I said. Then tell me again how well things are going. My former closest friend shifted her weight. Something in my stillness unnerved her in a way she couldn't quite name. I could see her trying to calculate what I might know. She had always been perceptive, she simply hadn't been perceptive enough. I checked the time on my phone, 8:04 p.m. At 8:05, two things happened simultaneously. My managing partner crossed the mezzanine from the far elevator bank, accompanied by a man in a dark suit with a CR Special Investigations Unit identification badge visible on his lanyard. Behind them, moving with the quiet, contained anger of someone who has been waiting a very long time for a specific moment, was Donovan, my ex-husband's former business partner, who had been quietly bought out of their company 18 months ago under circumstances that had never fully made sense to me. I had not orchestrated this moment, but I understood it completely the second I saw it forming. My ex-husband turned around. The confident, smug architecture of it, the tilted chin, the easy smile, collapsed in a fraction of a second. He looked at Donovan first, then at the CRA badge, and something behind his eyes went very, very still. My managing partner nodded briefly at me before turning to address my ex-husband directly. She didn't raise her voice, she didn't need to. The CRA Special Investigations Unit has been coordinating with our firm as part of a broader audit into Clearfield property development, she said. You've been served at your registered address, but since you're here this evening, we're confirming in person. Donovan took 2 steps forward. He had never been a dramatic man. I had met him perhaps a dozen times over the years, always found him measured and precise, the kind of person who chooses words carefully. He looked at my ex-husband now with the expression of someone who has been patient for a very long time. I signed a buyout agreement 18 months ago, Donovan said, for $80,000. You told me the company's active contracts had fallen through. You showed me a revenue summary indicating the pipeline was essentially empty. He paused. The CRA audit uncovered $2.3 million in signed commercial development contracts that were in place at the time of that agreement. Active, binding, contracts that you showed me did not exist. My former closest friend's hand went to her stomach in a gesture that had nothing to do with the pregnancy. The CRA officer spoke next, quietly and efficiently, the way federal investigators tend to speak when they have everything they need and are simply completing a procedural step. He outlined the nature of the investigation, a formal review of Clearfield Property Development's corporate filings over the past 3 years, triggered initially by an irregularity in a GST, HST remittance filing that had been flagged by FinTrack. The irregularity had opened into something considerably larger. My ex-husband's voice, when he found it, came out wrong, too high, too fast. This is a misunderstanding, he said. Donovan, whatever you think you saw in those filings. The company shares, Donovan said, were transferred to your mother's name 11 months before your divorce proceedings began. She held them nominally while you continued to operate the business. After the divorce settlement was finalized, the shares were transferred back under a numbered company that your lawyer incorporated in Ontario. I have the OBCA filings. The Ontario Business Corporations Act filings are public record. That is something people who think they're being clever often forget. My former closest friend had gone the color of the white tablecloths on the mezzanine tables behind us. Her hand was no longer resting casually against her stomach. She was gripping the fabric of her gown. There was one more thing that came out that night. Not from the CRA officer. Not from Donovan. From a private investigator's report that Donovan had commissioned 6 months earlier, when his own lawyer advised him to build a parallel file. He had shared the report with my managing partner 2 weeks prior. I had not seen it before that evening. My ex-husband had had a vasectomy in the 3rd year of our marriage. I am going to let that sit for a moment because it took me several seconds to process it when Donovan placed the documentation on the table behind us, quietly, without theatrics, the way a methodical man does things. 3 years into our marriage. While I was still in what my fertility specialist had called the monitoring phase before the serious investigations even began. While we were still, I had believed, trying together. He had gone to a clinic in Brampton. He had paid in cash. He had never told me. And when the fertility investigations started and the preliminary assessments suggested no obvious male factor concern, because he had managed to attend only that first general consultation, before the specific testing, he had allowed me to continue believing the problem was mine. He had sat in our kitchen while I cried over negative results. He had held my hand in hospital waiting rooms. He had told me it wasn't my fault, that these things were complex, that we'd figure it out together. He had known the entire time that conception was never going to happen. I did not cry on the mezzanine of the Fairmont Royal York. I am telling you this not to present myself as someone without feeling, but because that particular grief, the kind that comes from betrayal so complete it reshapes the past, requires privacy. It requires a room of your own and time and the ability to sit with it. I filed it away in the same mental compartment where I filed devastating audit results when I need to keep working. His mother arrived at 8:23 p.m. She had been at a dinner table on the ground floor. She'd come as a guest of a family friend, the kind of social overlap that happens in a city the size of Toronto more often than you'd expect. Someone had gone down to find her. She came up the escalator in a coral blazer and a look of absolute certainty that whatever was occurring was wrong and was someone else's fault. She looked at the CRA officer. She looked at Donovan. She looked at her son, who by that point had sat down in one of the upholstered chairs near the coat check and was staring at the carpet. Then she looked at me. "You did this," she said. It was not a question. "I'm here to receive a professional commendation," I said. "Whatever is happening here is the result of your son's own choices." She turned to the CRA officer with the specific brand of confident indignation that belongs to people who have rarely been told they are wrong. She told him the investigation was politically motivated. She told him Clearfield was a legitimate business that had weathered significant market pressures. She told him that Donovan had always been a disgruntled partner who couldn't handle being bought out at fair market value. And then, because she was frightened and not thinking, because she had spent her son's entire life protecting him from consequences, and the habit was too deep to override in a moment of real crisis, she said the words that completed the picture. "You think you know everything," she said, looking at me with real contempt. "You think you caught him hiding some money. You have no idea what you're walking away from. The company is worth $8 million right now." $8 million. The Lakeshore project alone is worth 4 of that. He built that. It was always going to be worth that. He just needed to protect it from a divorce that wasn't his fault. The mezzanine went very quiet. Her son looked up from the carpet. "Mum," he said, his voice was barely audible, "please stop talking." She stopped. She understood, in that sudden silence, exactly what she had just done. Her hand came up to her mouth in the same gesture people make when they have said something that cannot be unsaid. $8 million. I had walked away from a marriage with $60,000 and a forensic accountant's instinct that something had been wrong with the numbers. An instinct I'd been too grief-exhausted at the time to act on. I did not say anything to his mother. I did not say anything to him. My managing partner placed her hand briefly on my arm and I nodded. I excused myself from the mezzanine, went downstairs, received my commendation in front of 300 of my professional colleagues, and gave a 4-minute speech about the importance of following paper trails to their logical conclusion. I meant every word of it. He called me at 11:47 that night. I was still in my teal dress, sitting at my kitchen table with my laptop open, and my cat asleep on the chair beside me, beginning to build what I already knew would become the most personally significant forensic file of my career. I set the phone to record and answered. He didn't start with an apology. People like him rarely do. He started with a threat dressed up as reason, told me the CRA investigation was a routine matter, that his lawyers had it managed, that if I intended to use this situation to reopen the divorce settlement, I would be wasting my time and embarrassing myself publicly. He told me he had relationships in the industry, that my firm's reputation depended on professional goodwill that he had some influence over. Then he made a mistake that I suspect he has spent considerable time regretting. He told me that my former closest friend, who held an active CPA designation through CPA Ontario, had helped him structure the corporate transfer documentation. He said it casually, as a way of implying the transfers had been legitimate, that a credentialed professional had vetted them. What he had actually done was confirm, on a recorded line, that a regulated accounting professional had knowingly participated in preparing documents designed to misrepresent corporate assets during a family court proceeding. CPA Ontario has a disciplinary process. It is not a fast one, but it is thorough and it is public, and a finding of professional misconduct results in the permanent loss of the right to practice. I saved the recording to 3 separate encrypted locations and went to sleep. The next 7 weeks were the most focused work I have done in my professional life. I ran the Clearfield file the way I run every fraud investigation, methodically, without rushing, following each thread to its source before pulling it. The corporate share transfers were documented through OBCA filings, which are publicly searchable. The timeline mapped cleanly onto the months immediately preceding his divorce filing. The numbered company that received the shares back after settlement had been incorporated using a law firm that had a professional relationship with his personal lawyer, a connection that triggered its own set of disclosure obligations. The Lakeshore development project his mother had mentioned, the one worth $4 million on its own, had signed contracts dated 9 months before our divorce was finalized. His financial disclosure to the Superior Court of Justice had listed no active commercial contracts. He had sworn to that on a sworn financial statement filed with the court. In Ontario, making a false sworn financial statement in family court proceedings is not a civil matter. It constitutes contempt of court and, depending on the specifics, can rise to fraud. It also nullifies any settlement agreement built on that false statement. My lawyer filed the motion to set aside the settlement agreement on a Tuesday morning in February. The motion was accompanied by 43 pages of supporting documentation. By the following Monday, Clearfield Property Development was subject to a court-ordered asset freeze while the matter proceeded. He didn't appear at the first hearing himself. He sent his lawyer, who made arguments that lasted approximately 12 minutes before the judge. A woman with 22 years on the family division bench, who had, I imagine, seen this particular pattern many times before, indicated that the evidence of non-disclosure was substantial enough to warrant a full hearing. My former closest friend appeared at the second hearing, looking like someone who had not slept properly in weeks. She sat at a separate table from him. Their lawyers were no longer coordinating. That, in itself, told me everything I needed to know about how their private conversations had been going since the gala. The CPA Ontario complaint I had filed was under active investigation. An interim notation had been placed on her registration, not a suspension yet, but a public flag indicating a disciplinary matter in progress. For a practicing CPA, that notation is professionally devastating. Clients check registrations, firms check registrations, partners check registrations before they sign anything. She had left our firm voluntarily 6 months before I'd even known about her relationship with my ex-husband. I had assumed at the time it was simply a career move. I understood now that it had been strategic. She had removed herself from any professional proximity to me before the plan was fully in motion. The judge in the family court proceeding took 3 weeks to deliver her ruling. She found that my ex-husband had made deliberate and material misrepresentations in his sworn financial disclosure. She noted that the documentary evidence was extensive and unambiguous. She set aside the original settlement agreement in its entirety. When a settlement is set aside on grounds of fraudulent non-disclosure in Ontario, the court has broad discretion to remedy the unfairness that fraud caused. The judge ordered an independent valuation of Clearfield Property Development as it had stood at the time of our divorce, accounting for the contracts that had existed but been deliberately concealed. She ordered equalization of net family property based on that corrected valuation. She added an award for damages resulting from the cost of fertility treatments I had undergone. Treatments that, the medical documentation confirmed, had never had any realistic chance of succeeding, given that my ex-husband had undergone a vasectomy without my knowledge or consent. The total awarded was $1.4 million in corrected equalization plus damages. His mother's townhouse in Etobicoke, which had been used as the registered address for the shell company that nominally held the Clearfield shares, was subject to a lien related to the tax implications of the undisclosed corporate transfers. She would be living with that encumbrance for some time. My former closest friend lost her CPA designation 4 months after the gala. The CPA Ontario Tribunal found professional misconduct on 2 counts, participating in the preparation of documents intended to misrepresent a client's financial position, and failing to maintain independence in a professional engagement where a personal relationship created an undisclosed conflict of interest. The finding is public. It will be there for anyone who searches her name for as long as the registry exists. The last I heard of my ex-husband directly was through my lawyer. A CRA investigation had resulted in a proposed settlement involving significant penalties and a repayment schedule extending over several years. The civil and family court matters were what mattered to me. Those were resolved. I did not go to the courthouse to watch any of this unfold. I did not need to. I had built the file, I had done the work. I knew what the numbers said, and numbers do not need you to witness the moment they are read aloud in order to feel the full weight of being true. I used the settlement to do exactly what I had always been building toward. I left my firm, with gratitude and on genuinely good terms, and opened my own forensic accounting practice in a small office on King Street West, not far from Bay Street. 4 people, plus myself. We specialize in family law financial disclosure matters, specifically cases where one spouse suspects the other of concealing assets during separation proceedings. We use the same tools, the same databases, the same methodologies I used on Clearfield. We are busy, we are very busy. I am not going to tell you that none of this hurt. The vasectomy discovery specifically cost me several months of difficult processing, the particular kind of grief that comes from realizing someone looked at your pain, watched you carry it, and made a deliberate choice to keep feeding it. That is not something you resolve quickly or cleanly. I had good support around me, and I made use of it fully. But I will also tell you this, because I believe it completely. The most reliable form of clarity I know is documentation. Not memory, not feeling, not the suspicion that sits in your chest and keeps you awake. Documentation, paper trails do not perform regret. They do not revise themselves to be more flattering. They exist exactly as they are, and they wait, with complete absolute patience, until someone who knows how to read them finally comes along. I know how to read them, I always have. That was the thing my ex-husband never understood about me. Not when we were married, not when he stood in the Fairmont with his hand on my former closest friend's back and told me I had never wanted a real life. He thought my work was a cold substitute for living. He had never considered the possibility that my work was, in fact, precisely what living looked like for someone like me. That the thing he dismissed as emotional distance was precision. That the thing he called coldness was the particular kind of steady that comes from knowing how to hold yourself upright in the middle of something devastating. He built a company on a fraudulent foundation and called it success. I built a career on the truth and called it mine. The difference, eventually, was everything. If you're watching this from somewhere in Canada, from Toronto, from Vancouver, from a small town in Alberta, where you've been sitting with a suspicion you can't quite name yet, I want you to know one thing. The numbers always tell the story, every single time. You just need someone who knows how to ask them the right questions. Don't let anyone convince you that staying calm means you have nothing left. Sometimes the stillest person in the room is the one who already knows exactly how this ends.